Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways. Achtung. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Murray, James Holland, and our very special guest, Tom Petch, for the third part of our series of SAS operations in Northwest Europe in 1944. And one of the things that's striking about this, Tom, is just how much is going on, just how much stuff they're up to. And also, I mean, you know, people tend to think of airborne operations through the prism of great big divisional efforts, you know, your Normandies and your Market Gardens and your Varsities or whatever. But this is much more in the sort of spirit of the raiding thing that airborne forces were originally set up for, isn't it? It's much more in the spirit of, you know, get in, get out, deliver a bloody nose and all that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it works as well as the other thing. I'm really struck by how much of this works. Unlike, you know, a bigger airborne shows which, you know, fraught with risk and chaos.
Excellent book, Hal. Which I'm not
trying to get a plug in here.
Started to enjoy. Yes. I must admit, I've only started it. So there you go.
No, that's right.
But I think you're right, and I think that was the point I made in one of the early episodes. Is that unlike trying to get a division airborne and out there, if you've only got to throw 10 men in and out of an aircraft, you can do that quite quickly. And also, in the planning phase, the risks of that are very low. So, you know, you're not in the business of, what we're going to do, is this going to work? And quite a lot of the time, this is quite ad hoc. And this bit we're going to come into now in this final episode, the pursuit phase, they can start throwing people out directly in front of the advancing forces.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. It gives you so much more flexibility, doesn't it? And it means you can be much more responsive.
Well, you aren't sat around waiting for your second lift in any of this, are you? Like,
No.
You know, you aren't dividing your effort. It is the case that the bigger these operations get, the risks multiply, the complications increase. And this is proof of concept of airborne warfare.
It is. And the other thing, of course, because you've only got a few guys, once you get the jeeps in, you're completely mobile.
Yeah.
So your range of operation goes up exponentially.
Yeah.
So whereas, you know, a para-battalion, it's static. You know, it's got to walk to Arnhem.
Yes.
It's like
That's
there's
right,
no other way, you know.
And the jeeps are for its ammunition or whatever.
Exactly. Whereas here, you know, you can mount up a squadron, best part of a squadron, and you can move 100 miles, you know, and carry out an operation. So it's a completely different ballgame. Yeah. And as you say, it's what originally, it was the original idea for these forces, for special forces, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really strikes me is that, you know, you have the development of the SAS in the North African Western Desert, and that's all incredibly successful. Then you have this sort of hiatus period where they're basically being used as sort of glorified commandos, you know, such as sort of Termoli and even to a certain extent on Capomuro di Porco in Sicily.
Yeah.
But you suddenly sense, don't you, by the kind of middle of the summer of 1944, that they're now comfortable in their skin. They know what they're about. They know what they want to do. These are different from paratroopers.
Yeah.
There's a sort of growing self-confidence in their capabilities and what can be achieved with these units. That's the feeling I'm getting. Do you think that's correct?
I think that's true. And I think, as we talked about earlier with the Eisenhower intervention, I think the Americans have got to take some credit for this in the strategic use of these troops, in the idea these are not going to be, you know, dropped just behind Normandy to try and cut off Panzers. We're going to try and do something smart with these guys and use them with the Maquis, which is the overall strategic concept. And I think that's the thing about SAS. You've always got to look through the prism of what is the strategic story, because they're strategic troops. That's how they're going to get employed.
Yeah.
We're in August now, aren't we? Oh, no, July.
August. Yeah. So the timeline's not exact, but what I tried to do is split. Last episode was really interdiction. We're cutting railways. We're trying to stop Panzers getting to the Normandy beaches. Now things are beginning to break up around Normandy. You know, you've got attempts to get out with Goodwood and stuff going on. And now the SAS are going to go into the pursuit phase. What can they do to assist this phase?
Okay. I mean, what's striking about these is how sort of tidy and small these are. Operation Haft, for instance, or Haft.
Haft.
You say Haft, I say Haft, is one stick of blokes.
Exactly.
That's striking, isn't it? You know, is that even an operation? I mean, obviously it is.
It is. We're talking about operational names, Al. I think the SAS are burning through operational names so fast. It's getting kind of desperate. I mean, I had to look up Haft. Haft is the handle to an axe, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So this is a little stick, and this is what we're talking about. Is an opportunistic job. It's just north of the Loire. North of them, the Yanks are beginning to shift. What can we do to help them? And this is really about airstrikes. The other thing they've slightly woken up to.
So this is basically like being kind of Rover Davids, kind of forward observers, effectively.
Forward observers. That's exactly it. They're also going to link up with the Maquis, but really this is going to be what can we do to shift things directly in front of the American advance? Yeah. And the other thing they've woken up, smelt the coffee, is they've got Private de Maison, my French is so bad, from 4SS, because they've started to put French in these teams. Yeah. Because, if you've got a French speaker with you, that's enormously going to help, you gather intelligence. They hit the ground north of the Loire, 7th, 8th of July, while Patton's kind of, and that lot, the Americans are north of them. And then they call in airstrikes. And I'll just give you an example because I've got all the target lists. So this is a target from Haft, and the target is C. So it's Charlie 128, 40,000 litres of fuel are at Chateau Dada, and they give the grid reference, plus 20 tons of ammunition, which are stashed both sides of the roads, Yankee, whatever. So they've called that in. Now, 40,000 litres of amp fuel is, one of those big trucks you see on the motorway, that's 40,000 litres.
Right.
And if you think a Panzer Mark IV probably has a tank of about 500 litres. And the thing about Panzers in combat, because I was a tanky originally, they burn a hell of a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
And that's going to vaporise. And that's just behind the front line. That's their ready fuel for their armour gone in a blinding flash of smoke. So it's just a really good operation, really simple.
Fascinating.
And like I say, very few guys involved.
And a massive tick, right?
Yeah, massive tick, yeah.
And then, we're in alphabetical order, aren't we? Then there's Operation Haggard, which comes after Haft. Yeah. And that's B Squadron. Well, it is. There it is, right?
Then Operation Kipling.
I think there's a book. I think there's a book, basically, on Second World War operational titles, what they were supposed to be, what they got changed to, what the meaning is. It's a big subject.
John Tregonning wants to do this.
Yeah, he should do it.
He does, yeah.
Dig into it.
So this is B Squadron of 1st SAS on the 15th of August, and some Belgians. Again, they've linked them. So there's about 75 men. They've put 2 Belgians in there because they've worked out that, and we'll talk about this a bit later when we come to the Belgian story. If you remember, the Belgians weren't allowed to be used, but we'll come to why they are now used, because they were only allowed to be used inside Belgium, but that has changed. And essentially, if you remember, B Squadron they were massacred, like 30 guys massacred, if you remember the operation earlier on, I think it was episode 2. But this, again, is where they've been recycled, reinforced, and re-dropped. That's the other thing about these forces, is they're fast to turn round. Once you've got them back, you put them back in an aircraft and you're up and running. Yeah. So this is, the Germans are trying to get away, and they're dropped west of the Loire to ambush them, basically cut a rail link that heads east so they cannot get out of the area, and then ambush them. And the results, again, 200 enemy killed, 2 bridges destroyed, 37 vehicles, and German resistance collapses, So that's before the Americans have got to them. So again, a good result, Gosh, that's funny. This is sort of ideal world deployment, isn't it, really, for them? And because the Germans are, by the 15th of August, they really are descending into chaos. Yeah. And so to increase that chaos, to multiply that chaos, this is sort of ideal stuff, isn't it? Then Operation Kipling. So we go Haft, Haggard, Kipling, C Squadron of 1st SAS on the 14th of August, so the day before. Yeah. This is Tony Marsh going to the Forêt Merivaux. Again, so in the Loire area, west of the Loire. Yeah. That's an advanced parachute party. Then there's jeeps. And this has a direct effect in Les Ormes, doesn't it? Which is extraordinary.
They get to the village just in time to stop a massacre of civilians, because the Germans are shooting civilians. And the other thing to say about this, if you imagine, if you can picture France, if you draw a line, as you guys know, from Loire straight across, all the action is really happening north of that. All the Allied armies are now turning left, heading to Germany. South of the Loire, it's just a free-for-all. The Germans, so by now so we land on the 15th in the south of France, don't we? So the Germans are going to try and get out of there. And this is another thing the SAS are going to do, is stop them. It's a whole, most of France is, there's no allies apart from the SAS and, Maquis down there. Yeah.
Well, so they can get involved in disrupting the Germans as much as they want. It is interesting, isn't it? Because it's a vacuum, isn't it, really? Suddenly some SAS turn up.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be very confusing for the enemy as well. Like, what the hell is going on?
It is. And I don't think we should underestimate, we know it's 10 guys.
Yeah.
We know it's 10 guys, but actually, if you've got 10 guys, a few Mackie, they've got jeeps, weapons, and they're calling in airstrikes, could be a battalion, could be a division. You've got no idea. I think the Germans are kind of, they're at a loss as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And the rate and pace of these operations, I mean, that map, it just goes up and up and up. There's got to be a point where what on earth is going on now? Yeah. Spreading chaos.
Yes, it's incredibly confusing for the enemy, isn't it? Because they just don't know what's around the corner. And that's exactly what you want. I mean, you want to kind of sow discord and division and paranoia and all the rest of it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, well, and save French lives, which is the other thing that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yes. They managed to get in there and stop a massacre, because the Germans are, as we said last time, there are a lot of rogue units. There's a lot of brutality. There's a lot of massacres. And a lot of that is directed at the civilian population. Now that everything's coming, the wheels are coming off the Nazi project.
Well, most famously of all, Orador-sur-Glane, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Gosh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is beyond, Sterling's wildest dreams, isn't it? This kind of effect, really.
What we're seeing here is what didn't happen behind the lines in El Alamein. There was an opportunity, I think there was, it's always a revisionist history, but there was an opportunity where if we'd had a 4th Squadron SAS at the Second Battle of El Alamein, we'd have been talking a different story, the amount of operations they could have mounted. But now here it's coming of age. Yeah, it's beyond the wildest dreams of David Sterling.
Yeah.
That's so far. I mean, that is really interesting because you're really the first person to sort of put that thought across. I mean, everyone else, when you're looking at the SAS operations in the Western Desert, it's just, weren't they brilliant? Weren't they fantastic? Not the missed opportunity.
No, they weren't brilliant around the Second Battle of Alamein because effectively you've got one squadron and then you've got a load of raw recruits drafted in at the last minute to make up another 3 squadrons, and they don't perform very well because, as I said, you can't really use raw recruits in this role.
No, you need experienced people.
Yeah.
And the training that's going on back in England and elsewhere, I mean, it's designed specifically for what they're doing, right?
Yeah, it is. And also, as I said, you've got people like the auxiliary units who were the stay behind guys from 1940. They were already in SF role, and you've got Mainz managed to get hold of the Paras. The French are very interesting, but then the French are interesting because they're on their home turf. So you imagine that if the Germans invaded Britain, we parachuted Brits back into Britain. They'd be working with the locals. They'd be speaking the language.
Yeah, and inevitably they're going to be more effective, aren't they?
They're going to be incredibly effective. And they are. The French are incredibly effective. They're on the home territory. And actually they do drop them in areas where they live or know or have worked before. So, they've got local knowledge.
That seems pretty sensible, doesn't it? So then, is that the end of first SAS operations then? So
we would draw a line under that. We're not going to cover every single SS operation, or we would be into 5 or 6 episodes. So I think the thing to do is move on to 3 SAS, who are the French. And this is basically the fact that there's nothing south of the Loire at all from the Allied side. And so 3 SS who've been held in reserve until now are dropped basically from west-east.
And they're all French, are they, Tom?
Yeah, they're all French. We get the odd Brit in there. So on the first operation, which is Op Dickens, we get Captain Burke.
Not to be confused with the destruction of Casino Town, obviously.
No. Different operation. But that's 3rd Squadron of 3 SAS and Captain Fournier's outfit. And they're dropped on the 45th of July. And they've got a 2 SS guy with them called Captain Burke, who comes down with malaria. Of course, the moment he lands, he gets malaria because lots of people who served in Africa.
Oh, I see. So it's a recurrence.
It's a recurrence, yeah. But what's quite good about that, actually, he then ends up in the forest from which they're operating and is able to observe and write a report of what he saw from his side. That's an interesting one because it's a slightly chaotic operation. I mean, again, they're fairly effective, but they have enormous problems with their Jedburgh team, which is headed up by Major Valentine Edward Whitty, who's in his 40s, Canadian guy in his 40s. And it's a question of maybe he was a bit old for the job. I mean, it's tough. You're behind the lines, The Gestapo and German SS are trying to close in on you. They don't get their jeeps, so they borrow a lot of local vehicles, which results in the French shooting their own vehicles up a lot of the time. Right. It's just a very chaotic operation, which Burt recounts in his report. Then eventually a neighbouring team come over. And the tragedy, really, actually, I do mention this, Harold, the guy who was their Jedburgh team, he commits suicide in 1945. And you don't quite know why. I mean, he's incredibly stressful, post-traumatic, whatever, having a really tough operation. There were a lot of Germans in that area. So,
And do you think all these operations, they're all, presumably they're all pretty edgy and taut the whole time and nerves on end and all that kind of stuff?
The thing is, you're living in forests. You're always at risk of attack or betrayal. That happens more as we move towards Germany, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. It is a risk. Not everybody and not every French person is going to come over and go, hey, great, the SAS are here. Some are embedded with the Germans, and they're going to go, hey, the SAS are in that forest over there, and why don't you go do something about it? So, with the effectiveness again, cut the rail links 10 times, 2 trains full of troops at speed were taken out, 200 vehicles destroyed, 500 killed, captured 200. Not a bad op for a squadron. That's pretty decent results. Bang for your buck. Yeah.
They are pretty well trained, are they? 3 SAS by this point?
3 SAS, if you remember the difference between 3 and 4, 4 are the French parachute heritage. So they come from the original parachute company, which was George Burge, who joined the SAS. The problem with 3 SAS is some of them were Vichy. So they were recruited throughout North Africa, formed in Britain in 1943. And basically they and the 4 SAS hate each other's guts. I mean, they were the guys who, in Ayrshire, as McClear, the brigade commander, said, they just basically beat each other up and would have killed each other left to their own devices. And the best thing to do is to drop them in France in separate places. But there's a lot of bad feeling between it. But they're headed up by this great guy, Conan the Wolf, who I've described as Asterix, who's this short press combats French paratrooper who's an incredibly dynamic character. And, they're very well trained, very good troops, Their
training involves what? I mean, it's obviously physical fitness, the whole kind of, 50 miles in 24 hours, all that kind of stuff. But presumably it's also unarmed combat training and all that kind of stuff. Some of the stuff that SOE agents are being trained on. And
yeah, absolutely. So they get trained. The French they're up in Ayrshire. So they always end up in Scotland or somewhere near Scotland because that's where we train them. And if you remember thinking back to the beginning of this story, that we're quite good at this now. We've got the training wing. We've got, on the back of the Fairbairn-Sykes initiative, you've got unarmed combat. You've got what Mike Calvert started with, explosives. So explosives are a big deal because obviously you're going to go in and blow up railways, you're going to blow up bridges. You need to know exactly how much explosive to use. And then obviously the jeeps and then weapons training. So they're trained to use German weapons as well because, you don't know whether you might need some more weapons. So, it's good special forces training with all the endurance that you'd expect and different to what the Paras are doing because they're marching in big formations around to, do company, battalion-side group attacks. Yeah.
Well, they're light infantry, really, aren't they?
I'm just amazed by the vast number of operations. I mean, it's just...
Well, it gets exponentially because 3 SAS have obviously, this is interesting because 3 SAS have obviously been held in reserve and they start dropping them in the West. And then if you look at the map, they start dropping them across France. So once Dragoon happens and we land in the south of France.
So Dragoon is the invasion of southern France on 15th of August.
15th of August. You think at that point, the Germans really know the game's up. They are just going to go and try and get out of France. And 3 SS are the key guys who then get parachuted whole way across France, all the way to the Swiss border to basically stop them getting out.
Yeah.
I mean, you've already got people like William Fraser and Hounsworth down there already, but this is a big reinforcement.
I mean, this is extraordinary. So there's Op Moses, Derry, Sampson, Marshal Snellgrove, or Debenhams.
I call it Debenhams because I had to look up what Marshal Snellgrove was.
Right.
It's a shop on Oxford Street. They're really scraping the barrel. Come on, what are you going to call this op?
Marshal Snellgrove is a terrible name for an operation.
It's a terrible Well, there's
name.
one later on, which is Harrod Baker. I really struggle with that. And the only connection I get is Harrod's, the shop, and Barker with the shoes, the army. They're very posh shoes. So is that the shoes they bought from Harrod's? Or there's Barker Ellis, which is a silverware manufacturer. So they're just making it up by now.
The officers' favourite retail brands, basically.
Yeah, exactly. What's in Knightsbridge?
It's like Operation Chanel or something.
Exactly.
Or whatever. So Moses, I mean, it's interesting this because as the pattern, looking at your brilliant notes, Tom, as the pattern runs out, you see more and more French places. And as you say, by Operation Samson, they're in Vienne and Limoges, right in the centre of France.
Yeah.
And as well as supporting Operation, I mean, it's extraordinary. The sort of ambition of it is.
It is.
Yeah. And the staff planning this, they must be working frantically to get this stuff together.
Well, it's interesting because the planning, this is a principle of the Special Air Service. The planning happens at the unit level.
Right.
So what happens is that, and we'll come to this with 2 SAS who have more problems in this area, but They get given the job, the gig, and then they sit down and go, how do we carry it out? And then they go back up to SHAEF to arrange the air transport and the liaison. Yeah. And that's a really good way of doing things because, as I said, nobody's served in the SAS. No general has a clue what these guys can do.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, the best people to do it are actually the squadron leaders and the CO and go, well, how do we get a bunch of guys, into wherever to, for example, there was one, which is a coup de main operation. They've got to capture 2 bridges. That's Derry. In Brittany, how are we going to do that? Oh, well, we'll get 2 squadrons to do it and we'll get these guys and that's how we'll capture those bridges. And if you compare that to what the Paras try and do, Arnhem, it's completely different. This is 2 small teams. We know the Yanks are going to turn up pretty quick. 3rd American Infantry Division are on their way and they want to capture these 2 bridges. So what do? We do a coup de main. We capture both ends. Boom, done.
Yeah.
I mean, compare that to your book, Al. It's quite a different story.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
So how does it work then? Now, what is the chain of command then? What's the process? If the individual groups and units of the various units of the SAS are doing the planning of what... So from above, somewhere above says, we want to take out this bridge, that then filters down to... What?
Ultimately, it's Eisenhower and it's SHAEF because their strategic command, he decides and dictates that. So if you remember right back at the beginning, we talked about how he stopped Monty using the SAS because Monty had got his hands on the SAS via Browning and Eisenhower pulled everyone bar 4 SS out of that command structure and said, no, you're not going to do that. They're my people. And so you've got SHAEF essentially planning these ops, which is also good because SHAEF also run the air. So that's great. So you've got a tie in there. And then you get the request. Look, can you get...
So there is some kind of, I don't know, what's planning? Is it 4 or 2, G2, whatever?
Yeah. Well, it depends if it's ops, G3, yeah.
G3, okay. So G3 staff officer sends down the message to... Is there now a SAS headquarters? Presumably there is.
Yes, there is. So there's McLeod's headquarters. So if they are a brigade, in the UK, they have a functioning brigade. And in the UK... most of the time, the individual regimental headquarters. So you have the CO like Maine, you'll have his intelligence officer, who in that case was Mike Sadler.
Yes, of course.
They're independent. So you have that structure within the UK. But then when it comes to the individual op, it would be Maine and whoever who'd sit down and go. So, for example, I talked last time about how Maine didn't want to do Titanic. He just said no. He said, no, that's nuts. I'm not letting my men do that. And that ended up on Brian Franks' plate. So, when you get given an op, you're given, some leeway to say that's how we should do it, which is a great way of doing it.
Is it a little like a sort of cab rank thing? So it's like, well, we got an op that we want. Who can you put on it? I mean, judging by the dates, there's like a regular rhythm of it, isn't it?
Yeah, there is.
And that people are essentially standing by to go.
I mean, I think if you look at 3SS, that's obviously strategic. So they thought that through. They thought 3SS are in reserve. We won't deploy them at D-Day or any time. I mean, the first drop for 3SS is whatever, it's 14th of July. So they're clearly, and 2SS are the same, they're being held in reserve. So you've got the 2 battalions that deploy on D-Day, which is 4 and 1, and the other 2 held in reserve. So that's strategic. But then if you look at that one we just talked about, which was the ad hoc operation.
Derry.
That seems to be like, okay, we just need someone to go and do this now quickly. Right. Let's get, and also you've got people where, okay, we've got back part of B Squadron. What are we going to do with them? We've got them back. And actually, sometimes as we go on a bit, this becomes more Jeep-borne because they don't need to recycle them back to the air. They can just get them back with their Jeeps or give them Jeeps and then they're mobile.
Refit them and
send them back out. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is beyond the modern SAS's wildest dreams, isn't it? This whole brigade of people in a kind of state of permanent deployment.
It is something. I think I keep thinking it's 1944, and it's kind of bizarre because there hasn't really been an indication that this was going to happen before that. I mean, there's been a lot of resistance. Yeah. I think it's just been, in a way, the opportunity within France has just presented itself. If you think about the size of France, the forests, and the fact that it's just ideal territory for this stuff,
Yeah. And it's got the sort of, differences of topography, hasn't it? Just before we go to break, should we just sort of sum up SAS operations in France? I mean, you'd have to say they're incredibly successful, aren't they?
They are. And actually, so the Wolf kind of drops in himself. So it's quite interesting when commanding officers decide to deploy, because obviously they're, for example, Maine, he stays back in Britain, which is probably the right decision for a long time. And then he kind of misses the boat because D Squadron get taken out and he doesn't actually get in on the ground at the time he wanted to. But Conan, he goes, okay, this is the moment. You've got all these Germans trying to get out of France. what am I going to do? And he drops in on the 12th, 13th of August, very close to Switzerland, to coordinate all the attacks on the Route Nationale 6 and 74. So that's right close to the Swiss border, where the Germans are now piling up, trying to get out. And then there's an operation to reinforce him. And then really to sum up where the French get to is Op Newton, which is carried out. Basically, it's the initiative of actually this French officer who's a kind of a guy de Corbon, Rochambrun. Anyway, he's French aristocrat. He would have died at Agincourt. He's got a fleur-de-lis and all of that on his coat of arms. He's got a picture of himself, He dies, sadly, but he's got a painting in his family where he's got him wearing his chasseur uniform with his para thing on his chest. And, and he was described as the 20th or the 1944 equivalent of a 12th century Christian knight,
Right.
So he was always going to die, I think, at some point. But he's actually been in the Maquis, so he got left behind in France, didn't get out till 1943 because he got too busy blowing up Germans. And then he joins the SAS, and then he decides that, what I'm going to do is take all the free SS jeeps and reinforce my men down there. So he grabs all the jeeps, goes down there, reinforces Conan the Wolf, and they obliterate the Germans. And actually, they're a bit annoyed at the end of that because the US get quite a lot of kudos for the Germans surrendering to them. But actually, probably the SS and Maquis had given them a good seeing to before they got anywhere near them.
Yeah, fascinating. Right, well, shall we take a break and then return for the Belgians?
Yeah, I think we should definitely deal with the Belgians.
Deal with the Belgians, yeah.
We'll be back after the break with the Belgians.
I'm Marina Hyde.
And I'm Richard Osman, and together we host The Rest is Entertainment.
It's your weekly fix of entertainment news, reviews, splash of showbiz gossip, and on our Q&A we pull back the curtain on entertainment and we tell you how it all works.
We have just launched our Members Club. If you want ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and early access to live tickets, head to therestisentertainment.com.
That's therestisentertainment.com.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, James Holland, and our very special guest, Tom Petch, talking about SAS operations in the wake of Overlord, or they're part of Overlord, strictly speaking. When does Overlord end, Jim? When does Overlord become Eclipse?
Yeah.
1st of August, isn't it?
Something like that. Anyway.
Is that official? Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. Don't quote me on it.
And now we come to the Belgians. And of course, the Belgians, strictly speaking, are only meant to be deployed in Belgium.
Yeah.
For reasons, right?
Yeah.
And there's some ways around this, aren't there, basically?
We talked about this. So the Belgian CO is Captain Edward Blondel, and he's a bit frustrated because having heard he can only be used in Belgium, given that he's got these highly trained troops, poised and ready to go. It's a bit like the Poles in the parachute division. It's like, what am I going to do? And he goes down to Whitehall and just starts bugging them. And eventually it's General Marie-Pierre Koenig. I said that right? I think I have.
Yeah, Koenig,
Free French,
Koenig,
who we know from North Africa and big hero, who goes, right, well, I agree. Why can't they be deployed in France? They go under my auspices. They can come in with the Free French. They can go.
Yeah.
At which point they go. And they do. And so the Belgians, there's only about 140 of these guys. So they're only a company size. They're called 5SS, but they're not a battalion. And they basically, we talked about deploying just ahead of the American advance. So if you're sort of Le Mans and you're southwest of Paris a bit, and they deploy in a line north to south in front of what will be Patton's advance to, start causing some mayhem, really.
Mm-hmm. And there's that great thing with McLeod and Blondel, but this drop zone is in Belgium. Oh, I hadn't noticed. Okay, in that case, I hadn't noticed either.
Well, anyway, they're very successful because the first lot go in, but unfortunately, so the first lot go in on the 28th of July. We got Op Chaucer, and they parachute in. But the discovery they make that night is they parachute. They think, shit, we got to cover up our containers. So they use the parachutes to cover the containers on the drop zone. And you probably know at night, your night vision is black and white. You don't see color at night because of the way your eyes work. As the dawn rises, they realise the parachutes are bright red. Yeah. Because some bright spark has thought, recovering containers has been a bit of a saga with airborne forces throughout their existence. In the first op, Colossus, they put lights on, flashing lights, which didn't work sometimes. Here, some bright spots go, I'll give them red parachutes, which is great, possibly if you're in a big airborne drop. Not great if there's only 10 of you in a field in France. So they had to get that sorted out. And then I love Blondel's quote when he's heard his first men are on the ground in France. He sends a signal to the whole unit going, be patient, take care of your condition before you fight, because the day will come for you two to realise your expectations and put the SS slogan, who dares wins, into practice.
Oh,
so
That's Nelsonian. That's tremendous.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. Fantastic.
If you think they're Belgian, they've been run over by Panzers. They've been waiting for 4 years to get back into the fight. And here they are. They're back on the ground and off they go. And consequently, they fight like tigers. And I mean, you look at the results. They actually take towns, which is a bit of a first here. They're actually grouping with Marquis and making assaults on towns. And so if we talk about the leverage of you've got a few SS guys with some locals, a lot of locals. I mean, they get a lot of Mackie together. And by the time Patton's troops turn up, his town is ours.
It's done.
What's Blondel's story? I mean, he's pretty good news, isn't he?
Yeah, he's great news. Well, we talked about he's a reservist officer who actually was trained to be a dentist at Northwest University Chicago when the war broke out. So what happened to people, if you were a reservist, you had to report for duty. So he reports to Quebec because that's the closest place because of the French connection that he can report for duty. So he reports to Quebec. And then he comes over to Britain and then he and all of his unit volunteer for parachute training. And then there's that weird moment where the Belgians don't really want parachutists. They say, we don't want parachutes. That's the wrong job. You shouldn't be doing that. It should be recce. And then they sort of float. And as I said, they float around because they're too small a unit. They're only a company. So they can't really be anything. 140 guys isn't anything. You can't be a battalion. You've got to find a use. And that's how they kind of end up with the SAS. Yeah, it's a bit of an anomaly, but a good one, a good story. Yeah.
Well, and they're all these sort of literary operations, aren't they? So it's Chaucer and Shakespeare and Bunyan.
Yeah, I'm glad you spotted that out.
I rather like that. I mean,
who's doing that? Someone in shape is
better than whatever the other one was.
But Barker, whatever it was,
Harrod Barker.
Yeah.
So maybe someone more literary is on that one, and we've got some posh bloke on who lives in Knightsbridge on the other one. Out.
Exactly.
What do I call this one? I've run out of names. Yeah, and then there's a few ops. So this is where it gets interesting. So you've got to time your drop really, because Op Trueform, which is another Belgian op. So
great name.
We know, Trueform. We know the Falaise pocket.
Yes.
So you've got to time your op really with precision to get it working, and that's a little bit late. So it's a rush job. They're inserted the night of the 16th, 17th, and 18th of August. As you know, by then the Falaise pocket is probably collapsing, isn't it? When do they link up? Probably about the 19th, I would have thought. Allied forces, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. Or was it the 21st? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But basically, there's pressure on that pocket full of Germans, and they're all getting squeezed. They're trying to get out, and they just hit the ground. The Belgians hit the ground a little too late to cut them off. As they say, they get in there. They're going to blow the routes. They're going to blow the fuel, stop the Germans. But as they say, when they're dropped, they say the German troops still in the pocket only wish to surrender. So that's it. The ones they do catch just stick their hands up and go, yeah, we're done.
We're done, yeah.
So that doesn't really work, yeah.
Again, we're coming back to this thought that, the big airborne operations are almost too big. It's not that they're too big to fail. They're too big to succeed.
Well, I'm sort of thinking the same. This seems to be a much better use of airborne troops. That you kind of, you drop them in and suddenly from a German point of view, literally every other crossroad and every wood, there's another little Jeep group of 8 SAS men causing mayhem.
Yeah. And that's all they're doing. There's no great big bloody bridge that they're obviously trying to get their hands on. Although, obviously, earlier they are doing that. But it just seems sort of realistic, all this.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of fantastical.
And the speakers, I think that the trouble the Paras have is they're overtaken by events constantly. Oh, we'll do op so-and-so. Oh, no, we're already there. It's like, well... By the time you've thought, okay, I've got a first, second lift, I've got this to plan.
Well, it's because it's directing an ocean liner.
Yeah.
But equally, you couldn't do Operation Market Garden without divisions of airborne troops.
No. But you probably wouldn't do Market Garden. This is an interesting discussion because now we're talking about Monty. What's interesting about SS drops, not many happen on Monty's turf, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually, because this is all in the American zone, really, isn't it?
I've got a suspicion. When Patton catches up with SS teams, he doesn't really want them because a lot of what was very effective, if you catch up with an SF team and they got some Jeeps, you can use them as recce in front of you. But of course, they're not your troops. So then you've got to go, oh, well, we weren't the first beast that purred people into wherever. It wasn't the US cavalry that got it. It was this bunch of Belgians. It's like, well, there is an ego. I haven't got this out of research. This is me suspecting because one team actually say to Patton, we want to work with you. And he goes, no, go back, get behind my lines. It's like, right, well, why would he do that? Like, they're free troops.
Yeah. Well, it's yes.
You goddamn limeys.
Well, actually, I think they were French.
You goddamn frog eaters.
Yeah, they were. They were 2 SAS. You're right. They were. Goddamn posh blokes, get out of here.
So after True Form, there's Benson.
I love that. I think that's almost my favourite.
What the favourite name? Which we do favourite names at the end. True Form's pretty good. Yeah.
Now we're moving out of the 17th century into the 18th century. We've got Operation Defoe.
Yeah.
So there's Benson on the open flank.
Yeah, open flank. So constant operations, because if you imagine south of the Allied advance, which is now ploughing across northern France, there's nothing. And you've got this huge open flank. So a lot of these guys are going in to protect that, stop the Germans coming up and carrying out a counterattack, which is realistically they're not going to do. But if you're a general, I'd be worried about that. I'm pointing the wrong way and I've got all this gear sitting in the roadsides and stuff. If the Germans got their SH-1T together, they could possibly do something, Yeah, so that's and then we get No, which is where they actually do by mistake end up in Belgium.
Yeah. Right.
Ow. Yeah. By mistake. they invade Belgium single-handedly, two of them, as you do if you're Belgium.
Take over the Ardennes.
Take over the Ardennes.
Tremendous.
And then Blondel goes over that.
What was the big deal in May 1940? This is easy.
Yeah. That actually is right at the end. So we're talking 28th of August. So we're right up. Yeah, his squadron finally dropped. The Belgians get all hoovered up and re-dropped into the Ardennes forest, and they're back in Belgium.
That's amazing.
Yeah, happy days for them.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank goodness we're back to the Brits.
Yes, to SAS. Thank goodness.
Well, I think it's important we've mentioned, because there's a lot of books written about the Brits, but actually, there's a few other people involved in this narrative, I think. And
it's interesting, isn't it, that it is other armies, because there is the sort of conception that the SAS is a uniquely British way of going about things. But actually, there's all these other people in the mix and in the pot and in the experience.
Yeah.
This is literally an Allied effort. And obviously, then the SAS is wound down after the war and reborn for the Malaya emergency.
Yeah.
Is the SAS that re-emerges after the war, does that acknowledge its Belgian and French heritage?
I mean, there is. So the French have got a direct link. I mean, the French Paras, who to this day parade down in the Morvan Forest, have got a direct link to the SAS. That is their heritage.
Right.
So yeah, internationally, yes, there is. There's this very strong special forces link and heritage between these units. So yeah. And the other thing to say probably is that people tend to think, oh, you got one SAS, two SS, three SS, four SS. We're talking about this. They're never deployed like that.
No.
Paddy Mayne never commands 4 squadrons on the ground. That's never going to happen. No. You've got a squadron here, a squadron there. Sometimes they're with each other. You've got 2 SS working with 3 SS. It is a whole special forces thing. And special forces is about smaller units.
How is Paddy Mayne keeping tabs on all his men? On the
so
ground?
They've got comms. So brigade, through the Phantom Net, you've got the comms that go up. Interestingly, Paddy Mayne on one occasion tries to talk to Fraser on the ground with something like a wind-up radio from an aircraft, but Fraser can't hear him. And the crew on the aircraft just say, they fly around with Paddy Mayne above the Morvan Forest with him just swearing blue murder because he can't talk to his OC on the ground, which you can imagine, like Mayne inside a Stirling, unable to talk to his men on the ground is quite frustrating for him.
Yes, that's quite the image, isn't it?
I think in the end, that's why he jumps down there, because he just goes, I'm going to get on the ground, because he's a man who likes to be on the front line.
He's a man of action, isn't he? Yeah.
Man of action. But interestingly, because it's coordinated at brigade level, we talked about this, that Operation Gaff, which was to kill Rommel, carried out by 2 SS. 1 SS never got to hear about that because it goes up through the strategic net. It ends up in brigade headquarters, not regimental. So they never hear about it. Right. And the job gets given to 2 SAS. Right. So, in a way, these COs, once their men are out there, they're kind of running the rear party. Obviously, you've got INT and they're planning future ops, but the control on the ground is really down to the OC, I think, or the troop commander or whoever's down there. And we'll come to that in a minute with 2 SAS, because then as a CO, you're kind of, when do I jump? Or do I jump, because am I better serving the unit being here and hassling Shafe to get them more weapons and ammunition? Or am I better getting out there and trying to help them on the ground because I'm the CO of the unit,
I mean, this is what the SAS do now, isn't it? Small teams going on behind lines, causing mayhem.
It's all secret what the SS do now, but you can read it in other people's books, apparently.
Yeah. But but this is the same sort of thing, isn't it? I mean,
I think I could talk about this as public. If you looked at the early stages of Afghanistan, which went quite well if we ignore the NATO deployment for a minute, but that is basically linking up with local forces, calling in air, helping them, and seemed pretty effective, How long did the Taliban last? Not very long. They obviously had a resurgence, but we won't talk about that.
Yes, let's not get bogged down in that one. Yes, so there's Operation Defoe. We're back on literary figures. Okay,
literary figures, yeah.
And that's the 9th of August. So, the thing is everything's happening everywhere all at once. It's all simultaneous.
Yeah, what I've tried to do is do it by unit, but try and do it in some sort of semblance of order in terms of the chronology. Yeah.
So that's 2nd SAS, Captain McGibbon Lewis, And 4 guys. I mean, it's the thing.
It's 5 in total. It's amazing, isn't it?
In jeeps to get intelligence for Second Army. And they come out on the 12th of August without success. Why do you call it Op Pigeon?
Because of the mention of the pigeons. So to go back a bit, what's happened to 2 SAS? We had the sacking of their CO.
Yeah.
Then we have, it's taken over by Brian Franks. One of the problems they have, they got a lot of raw recruits. That unlike 1 SAS, they are kind of the poor cousins of 1 SAS. And then Franks, as he says, he's frustrated because he's trying to get operations started. He's been given stuff to do, but he says there's difficulties and time wasted in endeavouring to arrange reception committees. Satisfactory has been appalling to say the least. So he's been given ops. Then he goes into SHAFE, says, SOHC, I need to link up with a Mackie on the ground, and nothing happens. Because he's just not in the firmament. He's literally just taken over, poor guy. And he's kind of, so I think they give him Defoe as a kind of sop, you can have this op. And this is about trying to get into the Falaise pocket. So that's what we talked about. The Germans are going to get surrounded. Who's in there for Second Army? Get some intelligence. But they send them in jeeps with a tower, 35-foot radio tower, jeeps. To charge the radio, you've got to run the engine. You can imagine the place is crawling with Germans. This is not going to happen. So old Captain McGibbon relies on his pigeons. He has a box of pigeons. He says, the pigeons are really good. So he sends off his pigeons. But then at the end of the report, he goes, he moans, the Germans stick on the ground. The number 1 set was too old. The 35-foot tower took ages to set up and was noisy to charge. And the Slidex codes were ages to encode. But the pigeons were excellent. And I wondered when a few days into the op, he ate them. It's because after a few, my general lines, I've got some quite noisy pigeons in a box here. I'm hiding in hedges and trying to get this bloody.
That's really funny.
I bet he did.
I don't think he did. I mean, he did say that they were the best way of getting comms, but at some point I wonder whether he ate them, just because of the way he wrote it. Yeah.
Well, you can say the pigeon flew off in the wrong direction because you ate it, after all.
Then you've got Operation Dunhill and Operation Rupert, which you call Op 2 Close 1 and Op 2 Close 2. This is Tony Greville Bell on the first one, and it's supposed to be east of Rennes. 59 men in advance of the US breakout on Operation Cobra, which is the big, operation on which is launched on the 25th of July to the northwest of Saint-Lô in Normandy. But it doesn't work because the Germans completely collapsed. And Greville Bell goes, I didn't know what the operation was called, but I know it was a complete waste of bloody time. But, it might not have been.
It might not be, exactly. The Germans might have put up more.
So again, you're talking 59 men, so what? This one doesn't work, but another one will, so that's fine.
Exactly. But with all these ops, timing is absolutely everything. It's like timing is the thing that makes the difference between the success. And then we go on to 2 Close 2, which again, this is much further over in France and later on the 23rd of, actually it's not the 23rd of July, but they're reinforced in August to hit the railway lines 40 miles from the French border. But again, they're kind of caught up by the advance, overrun by Patton's army. And that's where they volunteer to help out. They say, look, we've got troops. Because at this point, SS have got, which we'll come to in a minute, they've got another operation right over by the German border called Op Leuten. And they go to Patton and say, look, we want to help out. Also, we've got our troops in front of you over there. We could help you. And he goes, no, you're going home. Right, get out of my way. I'm Patton. But then he runs out of fuel, as we all know. So, he doesn't go very far.
Swings and roundabouts.
Swings and roundabouts, and then we come to the one, this is Op Leuten. So this is right over. This is 2 SAS is sort of, it's too far, is what I put it too far. Op too far, like a bridge too far. And 30th of August, I can see the idea. So they're going to drop into this forest on the Rhine, basically, north of Strasbourg. And I get the idea that it would weaken the Germans. It's right up by the German border. They send in Henry Jewson 14, including a Jedburgh team. But you're now dropping really close to Germany. Yeah. Your population, unlike Fraser's population down at Morvan, are not completely loyal.
Yes, less likely to be sympathetic. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You've got an area that's been French and German and kind of, where are we now? It's in France, nominally. Yeah. And that is their problem. And also, the Germans are going to make a stand at some point, And the final problem with this really is Patton isn't going to get there.
Yeah. That's quite a big problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. It's the bridge too far problem. You've got airborne troops, you drop them too far, and then you run out of fuel, or whatever happens to Patton.
Or ammo, or whatever.
I mean, there were some things going for it. Druce knew the area from before the war, so, it's ideal for guerrilla warfare, mountains, forest, all of that. But it doesn't start very well. He's concussed on landing. We've talked about that before, where we had one guy knocked out for an hour. He's a sort of similar thing.
But it's only 15 men, isn't it? I mean, it's not...
Yeah. It's not a huge risk, but it's the prelude to what would have been a 2 SAS op. So a lot of these ops are, this is the advance party, and then we're going to reinforce it big time to really mess up the Germans. That doesn't really happen so much with this because they run into problems. I mean, the Macchies steal their containers off the drop zone. So you can imagine immediately you've got a problem. If your allies have nicked your weapons and explosive, you're kind of going, well, that's bad. But of course, they pick up a Canadian pilot, Lou Fiddick. There's always a Yank or a Canadian somewhere in the mix. And there he is with them. Sadly, in the fire, there's almost immediately a firefight with the Germans and German Jew. There's a lot of those in the SAS. Rudolf Friedlander is killed. And then they're reinforced, or they're supposed to be reinforced, but Major Peter Power from 2SS, that's the squadron coming, misses the drop zone, they get dropped 25 miles from the drop zone. They don't link up, so that causes a problem. Now we're really short of troops. And Druce then sends this signal saying we're really boxed in. He's having a lot of problems over there. And that's when Franks decides, okay, I'm handing over to Sandy Scratchley, who's his 2IC, and I'm going to jump with 23 men to rescue them. Yeah, that's why Franks is this great guy. He goes, well, what am I going to do? I can leave them hanging out there, or I can go and try and sort them out, which is what he does. And I love that he lands on the drop set, met by Dusty Crossfield, and he jokes, he goes, hello, Dusty, where are the porters?
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. So he does sort it out, does he?
He does. He gets it together. I mean, again, they're in a right mess because the Germans are torturing locals to give up the SAS, and sometimes it's working. I mean, I mentioned here they tortured one 80-year-old woman, and she didn't give them up, but some other people did. There are some sympathetic. Yep. On that drop, there's a Nazi infiltrator on the drop zone who opens up with a Sten on the drop zone, to try and kill them, but they get him. Hell. And then the Macchi are nicking stuff. So they steal some plastic explosive, think it's food, eat it and die slowly.
Oh, no.
If you eat plastic explosive, it's not very good for your intestines.
I'm sure.
Or mouth. Yeah, anyway, so that happens. And then they get jeeps dropped on the 19th of September. So we're talking right up to Market Garden. I mean, where's Market Garden? We're right up by Market Garden here. We're further south, but up by Market Garden.
It's 19th of September is 2 days.
Yeah, 2 days, so that's the Tuesday, yeah.
It's a Tuesday. So you can think that further north, things are kind of moving and maybe, but the thing is here, you're probably the poor cousins, aren't you? Because you got Patton not going anywhere. We're still fighting and we know this isn't the main event. And really, what is the point of this op now? I think maybe Franks thinks if he gets the jeeps in, he can get out of there, but he gets there and the jeeps got no fuel and the brakes are faulty and he's absolutely spitting mad about that. He then gets 3 more jeeps drops and then he finally gets on the offensive and shoots up some troops. But the Germans, once he gets the jeeps, the Germans retaliate immediately by taking 200 of the male population to a concentration camp. It was a really brutal situation. And then eventually he goes, look, we got to get out. And 6th of October, when they realise, Market Garden's failed by then, hasn't it? We got to get out of here. And the results are not amazing. 31 soldiers executed by the Germans. They had too many raw recruits, unreliable Macchi, and ultimately the wrong operation. I mean, it was an operation where if that had been the main event, you could think that if that had been in front of Market Garden, that might have been more useful, but it wasn't.
Yeah, well, you can't see that they're achieving a huge amount. That's the thing.
No.
I mean, shooting up a few Germans isn't really going to cut it, is it?
No, but, it's interesting because Market Garden doesn't involve any SAS. And you think, well, could have put some up there. Why didn't you send a squadron in somewhere? I don't know.
Do you know, I've never, ever thought about that.
I mean, the interesting thing with all this is your intentions are sort of, in a strange way, obscure, aren't they? Whereas, I mean, I always think the thing with Market Garden, where people go on about the German response, did they know and had they figured it out and they got their plans, blindingly obvious what they're trying to achieve. Like, it's so blindingly obvious what Market Garden is meant to be doing. The idea that the Germans need the wink tipped to them by either mysterious traitors or plans being discovered or whatever is absurd, really. Whereas this is like, if you're the Germans, you're thinking there's enemy. We don't really know how many they are. They're sort of amorphous. They pop up, they disappear. What the bloody hell's going on,
Yeah. Yeah, so we wrap it up to SAS Ops with Roy Ferran. I mean, the only comment here is how Roy Ferran was not on operations earlier. This guy was
in Italy, wasn't he?
Well, no, he must have chained him to something. The idea that Roy Ferran doesn't get off the boat ahead of everyone and parachuted into France before D-Day is, that he doesn't get there till the 19th of August. And when he does get there, he's incredibly effective. He's one of the best SAS operators. And, they take out Germans, 59 vehicles, train, 100,000 gallons of fuel.
500 killed or wounded, 100,000 gallons. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, he's a smart operator. Francis, it proves that with correct timing in suitable country, a small, specially trained force can achieve results out of all proportion to its numbers. It's kind of that is this story.
But I mean, it's a hard existence, isn't it? It's extremely tough on the men. This thing of being behind the lines as much as it is really, really that operation is what, 3 months, isn't it? So
yeah,
and it's really, really tough on the guys, isn't it? That long.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said to this earlier, but Pardon McCarthy, who jumped in with one SAS, said it's unwise to keep men behind lines longer than 3 months. He said, look, at the point they've been behind the lines 3 months, and you can imagine it's tough.
Yeah.
As I said, the thing is your casualty and attrition rate is not the same as a regular battalion, but you are living behind the lines on your wits all the time.
It might be more keenly felt if there's 5 of you and one of you's killed.
Yeah.
That's maybe a bigger blow than if you're in a company. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a sort of unquantifiable. Certainly, Ian Wellstead's account is about mental strain as much as it's, and I recommend anyone who wants a taste of
good
this
book.
SAS with the Maquis in action with the French resistance. And he has that horrible thing where he gets back and he's married and he gets back and his wife says, I want to divorce. Dear John, he's been living in a French forest somewhere and basically in a ditch for months. She's his one consolation.
When I was in basic training at Sanders, we used to pin them to the notice board.
Yeah. Next day, when Margot did arrive, it was to tell me she was in love with someone else and wanted a divorce. I ought to have remained in the Morvan after all. You poor bastard.
You poor
shot
bastard.
At by Germans,
Yeah.
Anyway, well, Tom, thank you so much. It's absolutely fascinating and sort of, illuminating for the sheer amount of it. And also, I mean, in contrast with other airborne stuff.
Yes, I mean, my big takeaways are I hadn't appreciated quite how many operations there were, how extensive it was, and how much bang for buck you get out of this. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me...
You do.
The other thing, my big takeaway is the point I made earlier on about sort of growing confidence. And, these guys know what they're about. And, some of them aren't successful, but it doesn't really matter because you're talking about 9 men or something, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking brigade, so it's 2,000 men. Like, that's it.
It's like nothing, causing absolute mayhem.
Absolute mayhem.
And when you're starting to kind of get rid of 100,000 gallons of fuel, that's proper impact.
Yeah.
We can refract this through the idea of steel, not flesh, Jim, which we've often done.
Yeah.
We talk about a lot, but the British Army does like things that are cheap. Let's be honest now.
Yeah.
If you can do things on the cheap, you will go far in the British Army, right?
Yeah.
So here we have an example. If you're dropping sticks of 7 or parties of 5, that's cheap.
It is cheap.
Yeah, it is. And it's easy to mount. And it gives you...
bang
it means
for
you can just
implies
respond.
you're looking for a bargain, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And actually, that is the post-war story. It becomes quite effective. Like, do we want boots on the ground, or should we just get some people who might be able to talk to the locals and do something?
Let's face it, they look bloody cool.
Yeah.
They do. They're Denisons and their machine guns and battered jeeps and stuff. They do what they say on the tin.
Yeah, the maroon beret suits them despite
it's not actually the beret, is it? It's the wrong beret. But anyway, you like the maroon beret. It's the wrong beret. Sure, of course I did. Yeah. Don't wear it anymore.
Tom, that's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Guys.
Thanks everyone for listening. If you want to listen to all this in one go, you can, of course, go to our Apple channel, become Officer Class, where you'll get all of this without the ads, or join our Patreon and become a patron, where you get this stuff quickly, all in one lump, and other stuff, including the date for We Have Ways Fest. Patrons will be the first people to learn of this. Tom doesn't know. We haven't told him. He doesn't know. You see, secret. We operate on bigger level security. If we told you, Tom, we'd have to kill you.
I can keep a secret.
Turn of events. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Cheerio.
Thanks very much. Cheerio.